At 5:42 local time, a multi-million-dollar Russian armored convoy began moving along a narrow, muddy road in eastern Ukraine, under heavy rain that seemed enough to hide almost every risk from above. In that situation, the decision to keep pushing the entire formation forward may have appeared confident and calculated. But on this battlefield, the feeling of safety is often the first thing to disappear. Some mistakes do not reveal themselves when the convoy begins to move. They only become visible when it is already too late to turn back. What followed revealed a cold reality. The more expensive, heavier, and confident a formation is in its own advantage, the more easily it can slide into a situation it cannot escape. So what exactly happened on that muddy road that caused a Russian armored push, which seemed to hold the initiative, to fall into danger so quickly? Stay with Military Force to find out. The first problem for the Russian convoy was not enemy fire. It was the belief that bad weather would hide its movement. A column of 22 heavy armored vehicles moved along a narrow dirt road in eastern Ukraine. Heavy rain turned the ground into thick mud. For the Russian side, this looked like a useful moment to advance. Poor visibility often limits aerial observation. Storms can also reduce the activity of small drones near the front. In many wars, rain, fog, and low clouds have helped armies mask movement. For an armored force, that kind of cover can seem valuable when it must cross exposed ground. It can create the sense that the battlefield has become less dangerous for a short time. It can also encourage commanders to accept more risk than usual. That is especially true when speed and mass are seen as the main tools of pressure. But on this battlefield, the storm was changing more than visibility. It was also shaping the convoy itself in dangerous ways. The weather reduced sight from above, but it also reduced Russian freedom on the ground. Yet it became more serious with every meter the convoy pushed forward through the mud. The mud did not only slow the convoy, it compressed it. Heavy vehicles could not easily leave the road. Doing so could mean delay, damage, or a complete loss of mobility. As a result, the entire column was forced into a long file on a restricted path. Each vehicle depended on the pace and position of the one ahead. That made the movement more predictable. It also made the formation far less flexible. A force built to project strength through armor and coordinated motion was now trapped inside a narrow structure. This is why the weather became the beginning of the problem. The rain did not protect the convoy for long. It narrowed Russian choices while preserving the illusion of safety. Once the formation stretched along the muddy road, its pattern became easier to read. Even without a strike yet, the convoy was already losing the one advantage armored movement needs most: the ability to change shape quickly. Its escape options were reduced before the first strike even arrived. In modern combat, danger does not depend only on being seen clearly. It also depends on whether a force has entered a situation where its movement can be predicted. The convoy still looked powerful, but its power was being squeezed into a shape that invited danger. Russia believed the storm was hiding the convoy. The deeper question was whether Ukraine only needed to wait for the exact moment when that same convoy had nowhere left to turn. Ukraine's decision in this phase was not to attack the convoy as soon as it appeared. It was to wait until the weather changed enough for FPV drones to fly with purpose and coordination. That choice mattered because the Russian column was moving through mud, stretched along a narrow road, and shaped by the same storm it believed was helping it. Heavy rain had reduced drone activity for a time, but Ukraine did not treat the storm as a wall. It treated the weather as a moving condition that could create an opening. Once the rain eased and visibility improved slightly, the battlefield changed. The convoy was still trapped in the same formation, but the sky above it was no longer closed in the same way. That gave Ukraine something valuable than surprise alone. It gave Ukraine timing. In modern drone warfare, the side that chooses the launch moment often shapes the whole opening phase of a clash. Launching too early can waste range and the effective concentration. Launching too late can allow the target to change formation or move into a less vulnerable position. Ukraine appears to have struck between those two dangers. The convoy had advanced far enough to remain compressed, but not far enough to escape the road geometry that made it fragile. This matters because the ambush was not built on speed alone. It was built on patience. That also meant Ukraine was not reacting to Russian movement in a way. It was forcing Russian movement to enter a chosen moment. On a battlefield shaped by drones, that kind of timing can matter as much as power, because it decides which side begins the exchange with coherence and which side begins it with confusion from the start. Ukraine waited until the target was committed to the road, committed to the weather, and committed to a pattern of movement that was becoming easier to read. The launch itself also showed a level of organization that went beyond simply sending more drones into the air. Multiple FPV teams appear to have launched almost together, but they did not all fly through the same slice of space. The drones were divided across different altitude bands so they could approach from separate vertical layers while still converging on the convoy at nearly the same time. That method reduced the chance of friendly drones colliding in poor conditions. It also made the attack harder to process from the ground. Instead of seeing danger from one line of approach, Russian crews faced pressure from several levels at once. That changed the character of the strike. It was no longer a simple wave aimed at one point in the column. It became a stacked attack profile that widened the threat and shortened the time available for reaction. This is why the opening phase should be understood as a saturation attack. The purpose was not only to damage lead vehicles and let the rest react in sequence. The purpose was to place the convoy under stress at the same time. Saturation here was not just about numbers. It was about forcing too many decisions in too little time. A long armored column on a narrow, muddy road already has limited freedom on the ground. Once drones begin arriving through multiple altitude layers, that burden grows much heavier. Crews must decide where the main threat is, which direction matters first, and how quickly they can respond before the next drone appears. That is how Ukraine turned a break in the weather into an offensive advantage. From that moment, the ambush was no longer about a few FPV drones chasing armored vehicles. It became a contest between Ukraine's attack tempo and Russia's ability to answer sudden pressure that had arrived all at once. Russia did not remain passive once the drones were in the air. As several Ukrainian FPV systems launched, electronic warfare assets inside the convoy appeared to have detected a sharp rise in radio activity. That mattered because control signals can reveal the structure behind an attack before the drones reach the vehicles themselves. For the Russian side, this created a narrow but real opportunity to respond before the strike fully unfolded. In this kind of engagement, finding the people behind the drones can be as important as finding the drones. The defending force does not only try to shoot threats out of the sky. It also tries to hit the launch point, the control point, or the signal source that keeps the whole attack alive. Russia seems to have understood that immediately, which is why detection became the first step in a larger response chain. Once the likely operator area was identified, that information could be passed to supporting fire behind the front. This turned signal detection into counterfire within a short span of time. It also showed that the convoy still had a functioning defensive network under pressure. Russian units were not simply waiting to absorb the strike. They were trying to disrupt it at the source before the most dangerous phase began over the road. That response had a clear logic. A drone strike is not only an aerial event. It depends on people, antennas, screens, and communication links on the ground. If those links can be broken early enough, even a well-planned strike may collapse before it reaches full effect. From the Russian perspective, counterfire against the operator area offered a faster and more efficient answer than trying to defeat every incoming drone one by one. But that logic only works if the attacking force depends on one exposed point of control. Ukraine appears to have prepared for exactly that risk. When Russian fire threatened the first operator positions, the teams guiding the drones did not simply stay in place and accept destruction. They moved quickly, and control was shifted to backup positions that could continue guiding the drones already in the air. This detail changed the entire meaning of the exchange. A strike built around one fixed operator can fail the moment that operator is suppressed. A strike built around distributed control is much harder to break. Even if one point is found and targeted, the attack can survive through another. That is what gave Ukraine resilience in this phase. The drones remained a threat because the human network behind them remained active. That is why Russian detection speed, while real, still proved insufficient. Russia found the threat, traced it, and answered with fire. But the Ukrainian operating model was designed to survive exactly that sequence. Risk had been spread across several people, several locations, and more than one stage of control. This reduced the chance that one successful Russian reaction would collapse the strike before it reached the convoy. The larger lesson here is not that Russian electronic warfare was meaningless. It is that modern drone combat reward systems that can absorb disruption and keep functioning under pressure. Ukraine was not relying only on cheap airframes. It was relying on a flexible command method inside a contested environment. In practice, that meant the battle was being decided not only by hardware, but by which side could preserve control continuity after exposure under fire. Russia detected the threat, but it could not stop the flow of the attack in time. That failure allowed the engagement to move into its most dangerous stage for the convoy. The decisive shift in this clash came when the vehicles at the front and rear of the Russian column were disabled almost at the same time. That single development changed the role of every vehicle between them. Until that moment, the convoy was still a moving armored force. After that moment, it became a trapped line on a narrow road. The lead elements could no longer pull the formation forward. The rear elements could no longer support an orderly withdrawal. What remained in the middle was no longer a flexible combat group. It was a chain of heavy vehicles with shrinking options and rising exposure. This mattered because armored strength depends on movement as much as protection. A convoy can absorb pressure if it still has room to spread out, reposition, or break contact. Once that freedom disappears, even powerful vehicles begin to lose practical value very quickly. The loss of movement hit the middle of the column hardest. Those vehicles were now tied to a blocked route, unable to move ahead and unable to reverse in any useful way. They could not leave the road easily, and they could not build a new fighting formation under pressure. The whole advance had been reduced to one narrow channel, and that channel was no longer carrying force forward. It was holding force in place. Turrets could still turn, and guns could still fire, but neither action solved the main problem. Firepower without mobility could delay danger for a moment, yet it could not restore spacing, direction, or initiative. The muddy terrain made this even worse. Heavy armor does not leave deep mud quickly, especially in poor visibility and under sudden attack. A sharp turn off the road can bring delay, loss of speed, or a complete loss of mobility. That meant the road itself became part of the trap. The convoy was not only blocked by damaged vehicles, it was also blocked by the physical conditions around it. Every second increased congestion, and every attempt to hold position made the convoy more fixed, more visible, and more dependent on luck than design. This is why the ambush became so dangerous. The attack was not just hitting armor, it was using terrain to hold that armor still. Once the front and rear were effectively locked, the vehicles between them began to change from supporting assets into successive targets. They could no longer function as one coordinated body with shared freedom of action. Instead, each crew had to face the possibility that its vehicle would be next, while knowing the route was already failing. That kind of situation spreads pressure very fast. When crews see the column trapped at both ends, the sense of control starts to weaken. Timing becomes uncertain. Orders become harder to carry out. Attention shifts away from the wider mission and toward immediate survival. In that environment, even a force that looks powerful on paper can begin to behave like isolated elements waiting under threat, rather than a formation-shaping events. But trapping a convoy is still not the final step. To turn this ambush into a truly serious battlefield loss, the attacking side still had to make sure that the vehicles caught inside that corridor could not later return to the fight. Ukraine was no longer trying only to halt the convoy. It was trying to make sure the trapped vehicles could not return to combat after the ambush ended. That distinction shaped the next stage of the strike. In armored warfare, a vehicle that stops on the road is not always a vehicle that is truly lost. If recovery crews reach it later, the damage can sometimes be repaired. A machine that looks finished in the middle of a fight may still come back in another operation. That is why temporary paralysis was not enough. Ukraine needed damage that would remain expensive even after the firing stopped, the smoke cleared, and the road was no longer contested. This helps explain why the drones were not directed toward the strongest frontal armor. Ukraine appears to have aimed at engine compartments, turret rings, exposed gaps, and open hatches. These were not random choices. They were technical weak points where a small charge could create effects much larger than its size suggested. A strike near the engine bay can ignite fuel, disable cooling, or destroy the power system that keeps the vehicle moving. A strike near the turret ring can jam rotation and damage the internal mechanisms that allow the gun to function properly. A strike through an open hatch is even more dangerous because blast pressure and fragments enter the crew space directly, where heat and shock can turn a damaged vehicle into a battlefield loss. That pattern shows that Ukraine was using drones as precision tools, not just cheap explosive carriers. The aim was to translate a successful trap on the road into long-term material damage. A low-cost weapon did not need to overpower an armored vehicle from the front. It only needed to reach the right place. Once fire spreads through the engine compartment, once internal systems are damaged, or once the crew area is breached, the military value of that machine falls sharply. The goal was no longer just to block Russian armor from moving. The goal was to remove each trapped vehicle from future use, weaken later assaults, and increase the burden on repair and replacement networks. That outcome mattered beyond the road itself. A convoy can suffer tactical defeat in minutes, but the loss of recoverable armor affects later operations, maintenance planning, and force availability. It forces commanders to spend transport assets, spare parts, and trained labor on repair work that may no longer be worth the effort. That hidden cost can outlast the ambush itself. For Ukraine, that was success, because a crippled vehicle does more than disappear from one engagement. It also reduces the enemy's capacity to rebuild momentum in the next phase under pressure and limited options. Yet even inside that trapped column, one asset still carried a value greater than the combat worth of any single vehicle. It helped shield the whole formation in a less visible way. Once that link came under direct pressure, the meaning of the ambush changed again. One of the most important targets inside the Russian column was not another tank or infantry vehicle. It was the electronic warfare platform positioned near the center of the convoy, the system that helped jam signals, support coordination, and give the formation a degree of protection against threats arriving from above. In practical terms, this vehicle was part of the convoy's invisible shield. Armor could protect steel, but electronic warfare was meant to protect the network that kept the column functioning under pressure. It could interfere with drone control links, reduce the freedom of hostile systems in the air, and buy time for crews already under strain. Once that platform was damaged, the convoy lost more than a single machine. It lost part of the structure that helped the whole formation respond as one. A drop in jamming strength can widen the space in which drones operate, while the loss of a central support asset can make every reaction slower, less coordinated, and more vulnerable to the next wave of pressure. In a convoy trapped and under attack, losing that hidden layer of defense did not simply reduce comfort. It reduced options, and options are what keep armored formations alive. This is why the ambush revealed something larger than the loss of a few vehicles on one road. It showed how expensive armored formations can be neutralized quickly when detection, timing, and organization work together against them. The issue is not simply that a cheap drone costs less than a tank. Price matters, but it is not the deepest lesson. The deeper lesson is that low-cost systems become dangerous when they are used at the right moment, inside a planned structure, and against the right technical targets. In that environment, a force that relies too heavily on armor thickness or platform value can discover that neither provides enough protection by itself. Survival now depends on more than steel. It depends on whether a formation can disperse, protect its electronic links, and keep reacting under pressure from above. Once those supporting conditions weaken, even powerful vehicles begin to lose real battlefield value very quickly. So the convoy was not only damaged, a wider assumption was challenged as well. What failed here was not only equipment, it was the idea that mass, cost, and protection can still dominate a battlefield where visibility is fragile and reaction time is measured in seconds. This ambush showed that modern armored warfare is no longer defined only by steel, firepower, or the size of a convoy. It is increasingly shaped by timing, coordination, and the ability to act faster than the opponent can respond. Russia advanced under weather it believed would reduce danger, but that same decision helped create a formation that was easier to exploit. Ukraine used a brief opening to apply pressure in a controlled and structured way. That shift revealed how quickly expensive assets can lose value once movement, protection, and coordination begin to fail. The larger lesson is not simply about cost differences between systems. It is about how flexible methods and precise execution can challenge older assumptions about battlefield strength. In this kind of conflict, survival depends less on armor alone, and more on how a force reacts after it has already been seen. If this story helps explain how modern war is changing, then it also reminds us how costly those changes can be in human terms. Understanding how these battles unfold is not about glorifying conflict, but about recognizing the risks, the decisions, and the consequences behind every headline. Stay with Military Force for deeper analysis that goes beyond the surface, because the more we understand war, the better we can understand the value of peace.